Okay, I posted my other video a week ago-ish, and I said that I was going to post it to Twitter. Then it turns out Twitter only gives you like 2.5-minute videos if you don't pay for it. So it went on YouTube. It's probably where this one will go. So I had another question given to me. It's at the same time by the same person, and I've been kind of putting this one off because it takes a little bit more. I have to interact with some stuff. But the question is, what do I think of the 1689? Do I agree with the 1689 when it talks about government, for example? So, like last time, fair enough question. So let's interact with the 1689. Chapter 24 of the Civil Magistrate. God, the supreme Lord and King of all the world, has ordained civil magistrates to be under him over the people for his own glory and the public good, and to this end has armed them with the power of the sword, for defense and encouragement of them that do good, and for the punishment of evildoers. So that's section 1, and I'm going to read them sections at a time because video recording won't let me switch stuff without turning it off. Because while I figured out how to read stuff, I can't interact with other apps with the basic camera phones. So I'm still the most boomer millennial you'll ever see. So yeah, that section all sounds good. And the confession defines what it means by certain things later, because that would be my main thing. What does it mean, the encouragement of them that do good? Because like I talked about last time, I deny, in my last video, I deny that the government should be involved in welfare or programs like that, education, whatnot. Yeah, that's covered in section 2, but so far what it says, section 1, God is supreme Lord and King over all the world, and as that has given, kind of like Moses, he told Moses to have these judges under him, has put under him the civil magistrate, and they're over all the people. He's done this for his own glory and the public good. Still with him. If you don't start inserting your own novel ideas into that, or start going too far with the idea of government, either a government that's too weak, as was the first government the founders created, or too strong, too dictatorial, authoritarian, whatever, that's a good thing. And government is armed with the power of the sword for defense and encouragement of them that do good and the punishment of evildoers. So we'll talk about the encouragement of them that do good in section 2. But yeah, so far, nothing I disagree with. Obligatory Katie post. Okay, so that's section 1. Section 2 reads, "It is lawful for Christians to accept and execute the office of a magistrate when called thereunto, in the management whereof, as they ought, Kitty, especially to maintain justice and peace, according to the wholesome laws of each kingdom and commonwealth. So for that end, they may lawfully now, under the New Testament, wage war upon just and necessary occasions." So here's where I would start to maybe quibble, depending on what they meant by certain definitions. I've not gone through like a commentary of it, so I can't verify exactly what some of this was meant whenever it was written. Obligatory angry chicken posting. So just to break this down, it's lawful for Christians to accept and execute the office of a magistrate when called thereunto. So Christians can hold office, Christians can be called to office, and Christians can accept that office, no problem. Agree. In the management of that office, they ought to maintain justice and peace, agree, according to the wholesome laws of each kingdom and commonwealth. So this is going to depend on what is meant by a wholesome law. And I think this is left kind of up to interpretation, though I may be wrong on this. There may be something clarifying it that I'm not aware of. But I think it's largely left up to the person, because it says, according to the wholesome laws of each kingdom and commonwealth, they're supposed to maintain justice and peace, which means that if there's an unwholesome law the Christian comes up to, and so far, according to this document, that's left up to the individual to define for themselves, they can execute their offices. However, per the implication of this, at least, it seems that if a Christian were to, in the office of magistrate, find himself ordered or responsible to execute an unwholesome, meaning an unjust law, he should refuse. It's not even saying that he should step down necessarily, because Protestants have this doctrine of the lesser magistrate, which is essentially that if we're ordered to do something contrary to our conscience by a superior, we're to, ignore that order. It's an unlawful order, basically. So for that end, justice and peace, they may lawfully now, under the New Testament, wage war upon just and necessary occasions. So again, we are able to go to war for the sake of peace. It may sound like a contradiction, especially for people who can't think very well, who the whole idea of a war for the sake of peace seems contradictory. But just think about it. You have somebody who's dedicated to your destruction. It's not peaceful for you to sit there and let them build up the weapons and the power and the fortifications in order to do so, the alliances and whatnot. It would actually be more peaceful for you, for the safety of your citizens, to preemptively stop them from being able to go to war with you. And that could be interfering with treaties, interfering with troop placements, even on their own turf, stuff like that. Now, if this section is basically, whenever it says wage war upon just and necessary occasions, if that's a reference to the just war theory, that I think Augustine came up with it. I could be mistaken on that. I actually disagree with just war theory. Mainly the principle of you need to sit down and decide beforehand whether a war is even capable of winning in order for it to be a just war. Because that sounds good, but sometimes either for morality's sake, a war must be fought even if you're going to lose. For instance, like with Zwingli, who went into it seemingly knowing he was going to die and he wasn't going to win, but still went ahead, fought the fight, and died. Or, the French Protestants, the Huguenots, they went to war several times during the French Wars of Religion, and they were pretty much, they never won until like War 7. They were pretty much defeated every battle they were in until about War 7. And I think that was a just war, because it was for the rights of the Huguenots to exist and to practice their beliefs. They didn't have much hope of winning, and to be frank, they only kind of technically won in the end. And I say that because their Protestant prince became a Catholic. So, yeah. So that's section 2. We'll look at section 3 in a little bit. Okay. The wife's here now, so if you hear her talking to the animals, that's what that is. Section 3. Civil magistrates being set up by God for the ends aforesaid, subjection in all lawful things commanded by them, ought to be yielded by us in the Lord, not only for wrath, but for conscience sake. And we ought to make supplications and prayers for kings and all that are in authority, that under them we may live a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. So we're back again to one of the more agreeable ones that I don't have as many, if any, reservations, and we'll look at it. So, civil magistrates being set up by God for the ends aforesaid, which in section 2 were justice and peace, subjection in all lawful things commanded by them ought to be yielded. So, for the purposes of justice and peace, and the protection of citizens and all that, we ought to obey them, basically. Yeah, as long as it's for those purposes and it's a lawful command. And I agree. I might differ on what exactly constitutes a lawful command, and what constitutes a lawful command, at least in the nation, the state we find ourselves in, is the Constitution, and then under that the states, and then under that the local cities, towns, whatnot. All these things are over us, and each one we owe obedience to them, as long as it's for the purpose of justice and peace and the protection of citizens, as long as it's a lawful command. I agree. So ought to be yielded by us in the Lord, not only for wrath, but for conscience sake. So we not only obey to keep out of consequence, so to keep out of jail, to keep out of fines, physical punishments, jail. We not only obey to stay out of wrath, but for the sake of our own conscience, because God has renewed our conscience. We should, as Christians, know what right is, and therefore, whenever right is required of us, have no problem with giving that. And then it goes further, we ought to make supplications and prayers for kings and all that are in authority, that under them we may live a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. So we're to pray for those who are over us, the magistrates above us, the lesser ones, the greater ones, the ultimate ones, princes, presidents, whatever. And yeah, they're no problem. We ought to be praying for them. We ought to pray that they would rule justly, that in order that we may have a quiet and peaceable life, that we may be able to pursue godliness and pursue honesty, which I'll point out that Christian nationalists actually deny, because through their pursuit of things like blasphemy laws, they are basically requiring upon certain people's dishonesty, the right not to express what they think, the right not to live according to those principles, which there should be some limits to that anyways. Just because your religion allows for child sacrifice or human sacrifice in general does not mean that you have that right. Do not murder trumps your right to practice your religion. But for the most part, if you're an atheist, and you're living in a Christian country that's guided by the 1689 chapter 24, section 3, you have the right to live honestly according to your convictions, and to honestly speak about that. You don't have to lie in order to live in a Christian country, basically. So, yeah, somebody who calls himself a Christian nationalist and holds to the 1689 has to basically be wrong on one of those two, has to compromise on one of those 2 points. Either they have to require a magistrate to force their citizens to live dishonestly, or they have to give up on things like blasphemy laws. I wanted to touch on one more thing. That's chapter 19 of the Law of God, section 4. And the reason will become evident after I read it. To them also he gave sundry judicial laws, which expired together with the state of that people, not obliging any now by virtue of that institution, their general equity only being of modern use. So this would be the one that probably has the strongest caveats. So to them also, meaning the Jews of the Old Testament, he's talking because this is a reference to the Mosaic Law. So to the Jews, he gave sundry judicial laws, meaning the laws governing the state of Israel in the Mosaic Law, in the the Pentateuch. Those laws are expired along with that state. And those laws are not obliging any by virtue of that institution. So the ancient kingdom of Israel has expired. Those laws are not obligatory upon any person. And then it will finish by saying their general equity only being of modern use. And so here's the question, is that how do I want to put it? Is that a requirement that it's stating there? Is the 1689 saying that whenever you look at the Old Testament law of Israel and how what was considered just and unjust, so for instance, the building of the walls on top of the roof so that people wouldn't fall off and hurt themselves, is that obligatory, or is that I can't think of the word, allowed? So is it you have to look at the laws governing the ruling of the nation, the Old Testament nation of Israel? Do you have to use that as a foundation for law? If that's what the confession is saying, I deny. That would not be something that I could support. If, however, it's saying that that's allowed, you can look at what was what God required justly of the Old Testament nation of Israel, and use that to inform and help create modern laws. So it's not required, but it's permissible. Not obligatory, but permissible. That's something that I would support. And I don't know 100%. I don't know commentarily what it would say, but if it's a permissible issue, then yes, I would agree with the 1689. If it's a you are required to do this, I would disagree with the 1689. So yeah, that's about it. Except I do think that it's the 1689 phrases it so that it's allowed and not required, because 5 chapters later, chapter 24, governing the civil magistrate, there is no expectation there of using the Old Testament law, the Old Testament judicial laws of Israel. So because of that, I would say that this is something where, if you were to build a society around a set of laws using the Old Testament judicial laws of Old Testament Israel, then that's allowed, not required. So, all right, that's it. Bye.